maybe moving away from the idea that the work needs to be its own reward, or that, money and meaningful work are somehow detached from each other. I think that they're very much can be part of the same thing, and it's not a zero-sum game. And I think I'm a really good example of that, is that I feel like I earn very well using the skills that I learned in the academy.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. This podcast is for PhDs and PhDs-to-be who want to explore the hidden curriculum of finances to learn the best practices for money management, career advancement, and advocacy for yourself and others. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts, a financial educator specializing in early career PhDs and founder of Personal Finance for PhDs. This is Season 23, Episode 10, and today my guest is Dr. Leslie Wang, the professor-turned-solopreneur behind Your Words Unleashed and repeat podcast guest. Leslie works as a developmental editor and career coach primarily for academics. Leslie and I discuss in detail how Leslie manages her time and money, balancing the appointments and payment schedules of approximately 36 clients throughout the year. Leslie has molded her business to fit the life she wants to live, including frequent travel and personal and familial pursuits. This time of year, mid-April to mid-June, is my reflection and planning season. I consider what types of financial education I want to offer my university clients in the upcoming academic year, and there may be a big shakeup in store for this one. When I pilot new workshops and programs, I typically offer them to my mailing list subscribers for free or at a steep discount so that I can work out the kinks and receive feedback. If you would like to be the first to know about these opportunities, please join my mailing list through pfforphds.com/advice. As a bonus, you'll receive a document that catalogs all of the financial advice given by my podcast guests at the end of our interviews. By the way, this is the last episode of Season 23 of this podcast, and I'll be back in mid-June with the start of Season 24. You can find the show notes for this episode at pfforphds.com/S23E10. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Leslie Wang of Your Words Unleashed. I'm delighted to have joining me on the podcast today, Dr. Leslie Wang of Your Words Unleashed. Leslie is actually a repeat guest on the podcast. She was on way back in Season 11, Episode 10, released almost exactly 4 years ago from when we're recording this, May 2022 to May 2026. And so I'm just really excited to hear all the updates that we have. So Leslie, can you kind of take us back to, maybe a summary of where you were at that point, what we talked about in that episode, and then tell us what's happened since then.
Sure. So when I first appeared on this podcast, and thank you so much for having me back, I was still a faculty member. So I was a tenured professor of sociology at University of Massachusetts, Boston. Maybe just like a little bit of background about me. I got my PhD from UC Berkeley in 2010. And then I did all the things. I had a 2-year postdoc. I had 2 different tenure track positions. And I wrote 2 sole-authored scholarly books, a lot of articles. And around the time I went up for tenure, I was really burnt out. And I was looking for answers to the question of, is academia still for me? And I decided to train as a life coach the same year that I went up for tenure. And that was in 2019. I had a baby a few weeks before COVID hit, and then I was on parental leave and sabbatical all during lockdown. And so during that time, I think a lot of people were just really soul searching, and I was definitely doing that. And I realized that I did not want to stay in the academy forever. And so that's when I started building my business, Your Words Unleashed, and it also has a podcast of the same name. And so all of that was happening when I was still a faculty member. So I think when I talked to you, if it was early 2022, I knew I was going to leave. I had no idea when. And then 3 months later, I decided to leave. It was like that. So basically, I still remember all it was I got an email from the chair of my department asking what my course preferences were for the fall. And at that point, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. And I'm like, I have to resign. I have to resign. So I did. And basically, my contract went through, I think, August 31st of 2022. So I ended up just fully leaving. At that point, I did have a full-fledged business and I had launched it early 2022. Now it's 2026. So I'm moving into the fifth year. And so, basically I'm a full-time writing coach. I help people demystify the scholarly book writing process and create a practice that really centers their own values, and helps them, express themselves using a more authentic voice and trying to get away from a lot of the sort of jargon and insular nature of a lot of academic writing. And I also do a lot of career coaching as well for mostly tenured faculty members that are looking for like a renewed sense of purpose. And I think right now, as we all know, it's very hard times in higher education. And so I kind of do a mixture of both. I'd say maybe like 2/3 of my clients are long-term writing coaching clients for whom I do a lot of developmental editing as well. And that's most of my time. And then maybe about 1/3 are career coaching clients. And so I'm happy to talk about any aspect of, launching my business, going full time into solopreneurship. But I would say the difference is that like now I'm very happy with where I am. Like I'm really satisfied with, I think balance is a tough word, but like the alignment, I think, that I've been able to create between my career and my life that I did not have in any way, shape, or form in academia. And I probably didn't have the first few years of my business as well.
Yeah, well, I want to hear more about that now. I'm always curious when I get to speak with, especially people who, like we were just talking about, have a lot of agency over their own, calendar and over the kind of work that they do, whether that's inside of academia or outside. I'm always curious to hear about how people handle their time and how people handle their money. And there's sometimes so many parallels between those two. So let's start with the first one. Like, can you tell me what an average work week looks like for you, how you structure your time, how you maybe keep yourself accountable to the work that you need to do?
Yeah, totally. And it's an interesting thing to reflect on because it's changed a lot since I first started my business. And I think a lot of business owners are going to say this, but the first couple of years, you were just working your ass off. Like there's not a lot of limits. And I think also coming from academia where there's definitely no limits or boundaries with work, I was overworking and I was aware of it, but I wasn't in control of it. So now, moving into year 5 of my business, I am in control of it after having experimented a lot with like, what is the right amount for me when factoring in the other things in my life that I want to be devoting time to. So, I would say my weeks vary quite a bit, but I typically have about 5 to 7 hour long client sessions per week. And like I said, about 2/3 of my clients are there for writing coaching and developmental editing. And for each of those sessions, I need to take anywhere from 2 to 4 or even 5, sometimes hours outside of that meeting to review the work, give feedback, and that sort of thing. And then the other sessions are with career coaching clients who I don't need to prepare very much for. And so that means I really need to space out my writing coaching clients to not have more than about 3 in a week. Otherwise, I just can't keep up. And this is definitely a trial and error thing. And I've come to realize that like summertime is not a relaxing time for me for the most part because academics are on. They're producing a lot of material. They want to meet more frequently. So I've become much more rigid around like how many clients I will take on at a particular time. And then thinking about like, how do I sort of structure people so I'm not overloaded in a week? Because, after you work with someone for a while, you realize how much time it's going to take you to look at their work versus another person's work. And then I have to factor that all in. And so, yeah. And then I normally have maybe like 1 half-hour free coaching consult per week. And again, I stretch those out as well because I also don't want people to have to wait too long after our consult to work with me. Because some people will have like a 6-month waiting period and you're probably going to lose those clients, right? So trying to kind of think about people's time and my own time. But really, like, I just use Google Calendar to organize my time. I think I'm a much more visual person. I color code everything. So all of my client sessions are in green, dark green. My consults are in light green, exercise is light blue, other kinds of, health appointments are purple. Like I'm always looking at it and trying to figure out like what needs to be moved around. But yeah, for the most part, it's, I think knowing now, like, what kind of life do I want to lead? Like, what does that actually look like on a daily basis? How much time do those things take? Say, like, I want to, be able to cook dinner 4 times a week. That takes a lot of time, and that obviously takes away from other things that I can do. But if that's a priority, then I need to think about my clients and how to move things around so I can fit it all in.
Let me ask about your Google Calendar. So you mentioned in that some things about like appointments, or even like an appointment with yourself, like to exercise. Do you then look at open space and see, okay, that's when I can do my prep or that's when I can do the other work for my business? Or do you actually block out times of like, okay, this is when this type of behind the scenes work is going to happen. This is when this type of behind the scenes work is going to happen. How do you plan for those kinds of work blocks?
I'm not quite as probably detailed as some folks where they will block out the entire day because I like to have immense flexibility with my time. But I would say the first 3 hours of my workday, so about like 8:15 to like 11:15 or so, is I'm 100% on, which means I'm probably going to do the hardest work during that time. So if there's, developmental editing, especially challenging editing I need to do, that's going to happen during that time. And then coaching is probably going to happen after that. So I have blocks that I give like specifically for coaching. It's either going to be between, I'd say 10 a.m. and noon or between 2 and 3:30. And that's like, those are the blocks. And I just kind of have it mentally in my head, unless they like live in another continent or something. And then oftentimes we have to move things around. But I had made a decision a couple of years ago that my clients need to work with my schedule because I had been doing a lot of like trying to coach people in Australia. And so it was like 7 p.m. my time and I was exhausted and I had a baby and I was like, what am I doing? And so I just started putting in more boundaries around my time. And I'm like, if they want to work with me, they will figure out a way to do that. And that's, I will work with them within the range that I can work with them. But I'm no longer going outside of that. Right. And I think people also don't know how many clients any one person has. And so I have around 35 clients at any one time. And they're going at different paces. Some of them are like on parental leave and I'm not going to see them for 6 months. Others are meeting like very regularly every month for years. And so it's this dance. It's like a constant consideration of like how are all these moving parts working together, whereas I'm the only constant. So I gotta make sure that I can show up for all the people and their needs without feeling overstretched. And that takes years to figure out, I think.
Yes, and especially because like you said at the beginning of a business, you just want to say yes to everybody and everything and the boundaries. You don't realize how much it's going to affect you to not have good boundaries until you're a little more busy and you're a little more established and you have your work rhythms down and so forth. You mentioned earlier that summer is a really busy time. I'm wondering if you've noticed any other seasonality to your work and whether you sort of lean into it and you go with it. Yeah, summer's busy. I work longer hours in the summer, or whether you try to like make it more regular throughout the year.
That's a really good question. I've tried to observe annually. But I do think it's hard to tell under the Trump administration and like all the cuts that are happening in higher ed. It's taken away regularity, maybe. But if I had to, I think I definitely have a big drop off in, people wanting to meet or even new clients probably in September and then towards the end of the year. Because I did notice last September I had a couple weeks where it felt very spacious. And then it all ramped up back again. Maybe beginnings of semesters can be a little slower. End of semesters for sure are slower. There's a lot of reschedulings in April, May. But at this point, I feel like it's busy. It's just busy most of the time.
I'm thinking about this for my own schedule as well. You mentioned traveling, and we're in May now, and I'm thinking about my summer schedule, and I go to a couple conferences, so those are unusual weeks. I also have vacation scheduled, and I also am thinking about how do I move around these blocks of work that I need to do to avoid these weeks when I have these other special, things happening. And so that's very interesting that you've sort of built that into, for me, it happens in the summer, but like you've built it into the rhythm of your business that you do a lot of traveling and you manage to not work during those weeks, which is pretty incredible. How far out do you have to plan that to like make sure you're not scheduling client meetings or whatever during that time?
Well, it depends on how long I'm away. So if it's only like a week, it usually doesn't disrupt anyone. But then in the summer, we always go to Europe for like 2.5 weeks. And that period of time, if you add on the jet lag afterwards, like I have like 3 weeks where I don't really work. So that is much harder. And that's why I've stopped taking on so many clients in the summer. Like I won't for the most part, start new clients then because I have to fit everybody else in. And I just treat those like compressed periods of time. But I would say I don't not work at all. I have to take it back. I do some work on vacation, but it's always like I'll have people send me their papers to read, and I'll read those in like, when I got 45 minutes there and, on the plane, for example. Great time, actually, to be doing this work. I still do emails. Like, I don't check out completely, but I've never been someone who did. Some people like to like not touch anything regarding their work when they're on vacation. I like to keep my mind still in it a little bit. Like I might be editing a podcast episode or like putting things up on my website. And I think that's more of a personal preference because I actually enjoy it when it feels like more of a choice, almost like I'm getting ahead a little bit when I'm doing it on vacation, and it's very small amounts.
Yeah, so you're getting some like pleasure or satisfaction out of that as well. So it's not like taking away from vacation. It's like, it feels good to do a little work. I do the same thing. Yeah. I had a week-long vacation, like sort of over winter break this last year. And I was really debating with myself, like, do I finally leave my laptop at home? Do I finally like really disconnect? And I ended up taking it with me, but I felt like it added to the experience, not like took away from it. Cause it was like, yeah, planes or like, oh, we have to wait in our hotel room until this activity starts while the kids are watching TV and I'm going to do a little, this other work. So anyway, it worked out for me. Emily here for a brief interlude. Would you like to learn directly from me on a personal finance topic such as taxes, goal setting, investing, frugality, increasing income, or student loans, each tailored specifically for graduate students and postdocs? I offer seminars and workshops on these topics and more in a variety of formats. This is a perfect time to book me for a workshop at the end of the current fiscal year or at the beginning of the upcoming academic year. If you would like to bring my content to your institution, would you please recommend me as a speaker or facilitator to your university, graduate school, graduate student association, or postdoc office? My seminars are usually slated as professional development or personal wellness. Ask the potential host to go to pfforphds.com/financial-education or simply email me at emily@pfforphds.com to start the process. I really appreciate these recommendations, which are the best way for me to start a conversation with a potential host. The paid work I do with universities and institutions enables me to keep producing this podcast and all my other free resources. Thank you in advance if you decide to issue a recommendation. Now back to our interview. Okay, we've talked a lot about time, which I love to discuss, but again, the other parallel kind of is money. So I'm very curious about how you operate your business finances.
I mean, I have to say, I have kept my business extremely simple. So to the point where, my financial planner and CPA are like, you need more expenses because I don't employ anyone except a podcast editor. I have a co-working space so that I'm not completely isolated at home. I have some various sorts of scheduling tools, Zoom and that kind of thing. My podcast recording platform costs money. But, in terms of like keeping track of everything, I do have, a credit card that's a business card that I try to put everything onto just so when it comes tax time, it's very clear what I spent things on. I keep things organized bank account wise too. So I have a Capital One account that is just dedicated to retirement contributions that get pulled out weekly into a Roth IRA. I also have an account dedicated just to estimated quarterly tax payments. And so at the end of each quarter, I pull from there. So I'm constantly sort of shuffling money around. And I would say, I'm constantly also updating these financial spreadsheets that I have. And one is for me, where I keep track of all of my monthly income. And the other one is with my financial planner, where we're looking at that kind of together. I put in my total monthly income in there. I also use it to keep track of my all of my expenses and also keep track of my estimated quarterly tax payments. So basically, I had worked out, and this is why I think having a financial planner is amazing, especially if you're going to be moving into owning your own business. I wouldn't have known, like, what percentage of my income should I be putting into retirement right now? How much should I be paying for taxes? Like all of that, I think having guidance, like CPA as well, right, is extremely important just in giving this peace of mind that you're doing the right things. And you're not going to be surprised, April 15th kind of thing. So in general, that's how I manage my finances. I don't know if you have like more specific questions about money.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned a lot of great stuff there. And I think because you're working with a financial planner, probably the first thing was you do have a separate checking account, right? As well as credit card.
Actually, I don't. I experimented with having a business checking account, and it turned out that I just wasn't using it. So I do keep it all together. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the revenue for your business comes into your personal account or accounts, but yes, you keep all the expenses on a credit card. So they're easy to track, right?
Exactly.
And you're also tracking it, aside from just it being on the credit card, it sounds like you're also doing regular bookkeeping.
Yes.
And then you have these other, it sounds like savings accounts where you set aside, what I do, I call it a system of self-withholding. So you're putting aside the money that will eventually make it over to the quarterly estimated tax payments. That's going to go to a separate account. You have another account where you pull aside the future retirement account contributions that eventually get over there. Okay, interesting. Well, as long as your financial planner is okay with it, like obviously it gets like the stamp of approval, but obviously having everything go onto one credit card is very organized. And that's probably a sufficient level of organization to, comply with like the IRS regulations and so forth. So that actually takes away one of my future questions, which was, do you pay yourself like a salary or what? But if all the revenue is coming into your own personal account, then it's already there. But then sort of maybe the corollary to that is your business's profit, let's say, the revenue minus the expenses, minus the taxes, minus the retirement, is that very regular because you have these like long-term relationships with clients? Or does it vary quite a bit month to month? And then you kind of have to deal with that on the personal side.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it varies month to month, but annually it's very stable. Right. So from the beginning, from the first year I launched my business, I earned over 6 figures. It has stayed that way, and it'll go up when I take on more clients. And then I made a very conscientious decision to not overwork. So then it's come down, but it still sort of hovers around the same place. And because of that, it's easy for me to estimate how much I need each month because my own expenses don't change a whole lot. But that, like I am primarily paid by academic institutions. They have their own timelines. Sometimes it takes a very long time to get paid, depending on the bureaucracy and what's going on there. Like there have been some campuses where I've been waiting for 9 months and there's literally, it's somewhere in the system. Others pay me before we start. And so that's what I'm dependent on is kind of, do I know how they're going to be paying me? Do I know when they're going to be paying me? And then having enough to get me through the months where it's just going to be lower because I just put in a bunch of invoices and things take at least 30 days, maybe 30 to 60 days. So yeah, it's something that I have gotten used to over time, but it's just, I would say it's fairly disconcerting at the beginning because you're like, it feels like you're not earning any money. But then you look at the end of the year and you're like, oh, the totals are the same or the totals are even higher.
So my business also has a great degree of seasonality. Like high season is like just following tax season, right? When I send out all the invoices for the tax education that I did, and then the money rolls in, as you said, over the next 1 to 2 months, usually, sometimes longer. And anyway, so there's sort of these very lumpy times of year where I get a lot of revenue for the business, and there's other times of year when almost nothing is coming in. But I still have expenses to pay. So that to me is like something I don't want to have touch my personal finances. So that's why I keep like a separate business checking account. All the revenue goes there. All the expenses come out of there. And then I pay myself a salary from that account, which, as you said, over time, you kind of figure out, okay, what the annual is going to be. And then the salary is kind of based, a little bit lower than that in case of some fluctuations and so forth. But anyway, I don't want that to touch the personal finances side of things because I don't want to see like months where I'm making negative money in like my personal account,
Right.
It sounds like you don't have maybe quite as much variation.
I don't think so. I don't think so because I do have a year-round business. I don't think I don't work tremendously less, I would say, except for those holiday periods, which are built in. So that's why it was a little hard to answer the question about seasons, because I think in some ways I've stopped having seasons.
And I guess you sort of started to answer this before, but like, how are your clients paying you? You said some pay after the fact, some pay up front. Are these lump sums? Are these monthly retainers? Like, what's the kind of schedule of client payments?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. And it also depends on the institution. So I'd say 90% of my clients are using institutional funds. And I've noticed like small liberal arts colleges tend to just pay a lump sum before you start. There doesn't seem to be as much bureaucracy involved. Some of these bigger R1s, they will pay as you go. And so then I just decide like how many invoices will I send. So I typically take people on for 8 sessions. That takes around at least 8 months. So usually I'll invoice maybe every 2 or every 3, depending on how quickly they're moving through. I really don't want to do it every single time. It's just more work on everybody's part, honestly. But lately there's been some schools that have asked me to invoice every time. It's just easier for them for their own financial reasons to do that. So, and then the folks who pay out of pocket, we just decide what works for them. So if they're doing a 6-session career coaching with me, they might pay every 2. They might pay half at once. And so it becomes very individualized.
I can see why you end up just looking at this on an annual basis. It's like so many different frequencies and contracts and lump sums. And
And it's also like they might be paying through a credit card link. They might be paying through PayPal. They might be sending me a paper check. They might be sending a wire. I'm working with someone in Hong Kong and it's like a telegraph transfer, which I had never even heard of before. So it's a constellation of ways that I get paid. And that is a good, at least 5% of my time, I would say is put towards figuring out how to get paid, making sure I get paid, and dealing with the money.
I have also had to set up systems around this because I realized earlier on, like, oh, wait, did I receive that check? I'd have to go back into my bank account and figure out, oh, wait, this anonymous, payment ended up, from this institution. And now I have much better systems around like receiving, noting, sending a thank you, like all the things that go along with that. And I noticed at one point, it was a couple tax seasons ago, that I was like psychologically somehow like procrastinating sending out the invoices, like for all the work that I had already, this is work already delivered, right? From that tax season. And I was like, why am I procrastinating this? This is so weird. It's like an undeserving thing or something like that. So now I just have my assistant do that. Like she does all
Nice.
not all, but a lot of the invoicing goes through her because like, I just wouldn't do it in a timely manner. And she doesn't have the like baggage around sending invoices that I do apparnly. So
interesting.
It's been a learning process.
I for sure, I have to always, on that spreadsheet for myself where I keep track of payments, I also have to keep track of, did this come through Stripe? Did it come through PayPal? Was it a paper check? Was it a wire transfer? I have to know that because for taxes, and I didn't know that initially. So it's like over time. And then I also, one spreadsheet I didn't mention that I use constantly is I have a client sessions spreadsheet where I can see, and I have it all mapped out with months, when did they start? How many sessions did they sign up for? How many did they have left? And I'm constantly also color coding that around who still needs to pay. I have another color code for who has 2 or fewer sessions left, because then I can know when is someone going to finish so I can confidently take on another client without over taxing myself. So it's another thing that it's like almost like checks and balances around time, around finances, around like, did I get paid from them yet? Or like, what did they decide? Were they going to do 3 payments? Like I have to know all of that stuff. But I don't avoid, I find that interesting for some reason.
Yeah, I'm glad you like kind of brought it back to like this overlap of time and money and tracking and scheduling and like all that stuff, because there are so many like parallels between the two. So thank you so much for answering those questions. I'm always just so curious how other people operate. And I would imagine for people who are inside bigger institutions like universities, this would be fresh information. Like they can see what it looks like on the other side, like dealing with money. No, we have people to do that. Well, no, you have to hire them or you have to do it yourself.
I did not know that when I was a faculty member. Right. I knew very little about how to run a business. And the good thing is that it's a set of skills and you can learn it and you will learn it over time. You have to, if you want to be successful and sustainable.
Let's talk now then about how you would advise another PhD, maybe particularly a faculty member who's interested in self-employment. And I may have even asked you this question in our first interview, but I'm curious to see if the answer has changed. Like, how would you advise someone, and maybe you do through part of your career coaching, sometimes this question comes your way. What's like one really solid piece of advice you can give to someone who's curious about self-employment?
Well, maybe following up on what we've been talking about is there's a really big difference between having a really good idea for a business or even doing work really well and running a business, right? So like, for example, like in my coach certification program, there were a couple folks that were incredible coaches. I mean, they were so like innately talented at it, but they did not have the skills to turn it into a business. And I don't know if they really wanted to either, but you could see how like there's skills for the work and then there's skills of running a business. And I think, listening to this podcast and other business podcasts is really, really helpful in shedding some light on the areas where you probably need to grow. I would say also to really think about what you're bringing to the table that is different from everybody else who is doing similar kinds of work. For the field of developmental editing that I'm in, or even writing coaching, there's a huge amount of people that have come into this area in the past few years, which makes a lot of sense. There's an exodus from the academy. This is a very transferable skill. It's very aligned with how people were trained. So it's not like this mega leap. At the same time, if people like clients or like the world out there doesn't know how you think or how are you approaching this that's different from the 75 other people you just saw on LinkedIn, there's really no reason for them to be interested. And so I think that comes down to this word that I think a lot of academics are scared of, and I was too when I was an academic, which is called marketing, which is really just about creating connections with other people. And I think allowing them to get to know you in certain kinds of ways that give them insight into whether or not they want to be in your orbit. Not necessarily whether or not they want to hire you, but whether they think you're a compelling human being and they want to be in your realm, because you really don't know how people are going to hear about you, right? So maybe they wouldn't hire you, but they would be aware of the things that you're doing and the things that you're saying online, and really like what you're doing and refer you to somebody in their department. I think that kind of thing happens all the time, but that comes down to getting more comfortable with visibility. And so I think self-promotion can be a very tricky thing for many academics. I have podcast episodes on this, like how hard it is for, I think, most academics to put themselves out there, because it often feels egotistical, or it feels like you're bragging, or like, why are you drawing all this attention to yourself? And I really had to shift that mindset to get comfortable, and this is like incrementally over time, with putting myself out there again and again and again, and taking small risks, and with, sharing my opinions, sharing my experiences, sharing my reflections, also sharing about my work. But it was the whole sort of spectrum of things that I think is why I now have like a pretty good platform on LinkedIn. I'm not usually even talking very much about coaching. I'm talking about, what I think about academia, or, sharing my own experiences of leaving. So I think what it comes down to is, if people can think about self-promotion as more of like sharing, you're sharing your story, you're sharing your insights, it's more relational, and you're actually creating relationships with other people, then that can be something that really helps your business. Because in the end, like we need each other. We need people to know about us, and you need to know about other people doing stuff too. Like it's an ecosystem, right? And so part of that is, I think, allowing yourself in very small ways to be seen.
I found what you said so inspirational, for me to use in my own business. I like that reframing. But it also strikes me that successful academics also do this. I mean, we probably wouldn't call it marketing, right, inside academia. But I mean, I have had, like, for instance, Dr. Gertrude Nantra on the podcast to talk about personal branding, like not even personal. It could be just professional branding, like of yourself as an academic, the type of research you do, the networking that you do, like it's applicable there as well. It just may not be a skill that the types of people who are attracted to academia are naturally, many of them are not naturally inclined, but in either setting, it's a very useful thing to learn.
Totally.
Well, Leslie, this interview has been so delightful, and I'm glad that people can get to know you through, this platform and this interview. If people want to, connect with you, maybe potentially become a client, or just want to be in your orbit, as you were talking about, where can they find you?
My website is yourwordsunleashed.com. My podcast has the same name. People can always reach out by email as well. My email is leslie@yourwordsunleashed.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn. So connect with me on there.
Perfect. And then we'll wrap up with the question that I ask all of my guests, which is, what is your best financial advice for another early career PhD? And this can be something that we've touched on in the interview already, or it can be something completely new.
In kind of thinking about it now, and what I really had to do to go from academic to successful business owner is like, it's really about financial literacy. It's like learning the things, right? And I think that I have known many academics who take an approach of like more head in the sand when it comes to finances, because partly it's that like academics don't make a lot of money. You have there's a delayed period of time, I guess, before which you do start earning a salary, hopefully, in the academy. And I don't know, there can be just some fear, I think, around like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And then I think the other thing is in the academy, there's this idea that the work is its own reward. So finances are secondary. You are lucky to have a job, especially if you get a tenure track position where there's so few these days. You know, I recently posted something on LinkedIn, or I reposted something where this man was saying he just got a tenure track job offer of $57K in 2026, you know? And I was like, my very first offer was $54K in 2011. Like, what is happening here? So, you know, maybe moving away from the idea that the work needs to be its own reward, or that, you know, money and meaningful work are somehow detached from each other. I think that they're very much can be part of the same thing. And it's not a zero-sum game. And I think I'm a really good example of that, is that I feel like I earn very well using the skills that I learned in the academy. I understand what's transferable about it, but I have much more breadth now. And I'm able to align that with a life that feels meaningful too. So maybe part of it is like, I would first start by thinking about what kind of life would feel really good to you, and how does work fit into that, versus what's the work I want and how do I fit my life around that. And I know that's a very privileged thing to say, but I also think it's a really good thought exercise for all academics to do. There can be more alignment.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to end it. Leslie, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. I have a gift for you. You know that final question I ask of all my guests regarding their best financial advice? My team has collected short summaries of all the answers ever given on the podcast into a document that is updated with each new episode release. You can gain access to it by registering for my mailing list at pfforphds.com/advice. Would you like to access transcripts or videos of each episode? I link the show notes for each episode from pfforphds.com/podcast. See you in the next episode, and remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing by me and show notes creation by Dr. Jill Hoffman.